Some of the most important conversations in a person's life happen when no one is listening. Not with another person, just quietly, in the dark or in the early morning before the day begins. A reaching outward towards something larger than the immediate. A saying of what you most need, even when you're not sure who or what is on the other side. Bing Crosby was, for most of the middle decades of the 20th century, one of the most famous voices in the world. His recordings sold in numbers that still seem almost impossible. More than 500 million records over his career, by some estimates, making him one of the best-selling musical artists in history. White Christmas, which he recorded in 1942, remains one of the best-selling singles ever made. His voice was a particular kind of comfort, warm, unhurried, instantly recognizable, capable of conveying deep feeling without ever quite losing its quality of ease. People heard that voice and felt, somehow, that things were going to be all right. He was also, by his own account, and by the account of people who knew him well, a private person of genuine Catholic faith. Not an ostentatious faith. He didn't make public pronouncements or use his public platform to speak about religion. But a consistent, practiced, daily faith that shaped how he moved through his life and what he thought about in the quiet hours. He attended Mass regularly, often at very early hours, and often alone, before the world was up, before anyone would notice. The faith was, in the fullest sense, private. It didn't need an audience. Bing Crosby's life was not uncomplicated. He had 4 sons from his first marriage, and his relationship with them was troubled in ways that became public after his death. Accounts of a father who was more demanding and more distant than the warm public persona would have suggested. He had difficult seasons in his career, and seasons of real doubt about whether the work still mattered in the ways it once had. He lost his first wife to cancer in 1952, after a decade-long illness. He lived with the ordinary accumulation of loss and difficulty that any long life produces. And through all of it, the losses, the complications, the difficult relationships, the seasons of doubt, he maintained the practice. The early masses, the private prayers, the quiet reaching toward something larger. Not because everything was easy, and not because the practice resolved everything, but because it was something real to him, something that held when other things were moving, and that gave him a place to bring what he was carrying when there was nowhere else to bring it. What do you pray for when no one is listening? Or, if prayer isn't your framework, what do you hope for, quietly, in the moments when your actual inner life becomes visible to you? Not what you say you want, or what you think you're supposed to want. What you reach toward, privately, in the early morning or the late night, when the performance is stopped, and you're simply yourself. Most people, if they sit with that question honestly, find that what they reach for in those moments is simpler than what they spend most of their time chasing. Not achievement, not recognition, not more of what they already have. Something quieter. Health for the people they love. Peace, an inner steadiness that doesn't depend on circumstances being exactly right. The sense that the life they're living matters in some way that goes beyond what is visible or measurable. Forgiveness for things they've done or left undone that still sit with them. the courage to do the difficult thing they know they should do. Those private hopes, the ones that surface in the quiet, when no one is watching, are worth taking seriously. Not because they will all be granted, or because saying them makes them more likely, but because they are a map. They tell you, more clearly than almost anything else, what you actually most care about, what you value most deeply, underneath everything the world can see. Bing Crosby's private faith gave him a place to bring those deepest cares, a regular, practiced, private conversation about what he most hoped for and most needed. Not a performance of faith, but the real thing. The thing that holds you not because it resolves everything, but because it gives you somewhere to bring what would otherwise have to be carried entirely alone. Whether or not you have a formal faith, whether or not you pray in any traditional sense, you probably have some version of this practice available to you. The quiet morning where you let yourself think about what actually matters. The journal entry that goes somewhere more honest than most conversations do. The long walk where the thinking goes deeper than usual. The moment before sleep when what you're actually hoping for surfaces briefly before the day reasserts itself. Those moments are worth tending, not because they need to become more formal, or more structured, or more labeled, but because they are among the most honest moments available to you, the moments when what you actually most care about becomes briefly accessible. And what you most care about deserves more than a passing nod in the dark before sleep. Bing Crosby's voice gave comfort to millions of people across decades, and the source of whatever inner peace he carried, the thing that kept him steady through the losses and the complications and the difficulty, was something he found not in the recording studio or on the stage, but in the early morning, in a quiet church, in the private practice of a faith that needed no witnesses. That steadiness was real. And it came from the consistency of showing up, quietly and without audience, to whatever was truest in him. Maybe something like that is available to you. Not Bing Crosby's faith specifically, your own version, in whatever form is true for you. But the practice of regularly returning to what you most deeply care about, of giving it time, of letting it be more than a background presence, of making, in some quiet form, the conversation that holds you. So take a slow breath, and maybe, this week, make a little more time for the quiet conversation. The one where you're most honest. The one that tells you what you most hope for and what you most need. Not for any audience, just for yourself and for whatever you believe is on the other side of that reaching. That's always a good place to begin. There is one more dimension worth sitting with, something about what happens when the private faith has to carry you through something genuinely hard. Not the ordinary difficulty, but the real kind, the loss that is too large to manage, the fear that doesn't respond to reassurance, the time when everything you've been doing to sustain yourself stops working, and you are simply, entirely, in need of something you cannot manufacture for yourself. Bing Crosby had those seasons. The years of his first wife's illness were long and difficult. The reckoning with his own failures as a father, which came later, required a kind of honest accounting that doesn't come easily to anyone. The question of whether his faith sustained him in those moments is one he kept largely private. But the consistency of the practice, the showing up, the quiet conversation, the long discipline of returning to what he believed even when believing was hard, suggests that it did what practice does. It created a container, a place where what he was carrying could be brought, a relationship with something larger than himself that had been tended long enough that it was there when he most needed it. Practice matters because the hard moments don't announce themselves in advance. You don't know when the season of genuine need will arrive. And the practices that sustain you in those seasons, the faith, the community, the regular returning to what you most value, are practices that need to be in place before the hardness comes, not assembled hurriedly in the middle of it. The early masses that Bing Crosby attended, in the ordinary seasons, were the same thing as the early masses he attended in the hard ones, except that in the hard ones they carried more, because they had been built into the structure of his life long enough that they were simply there, reliable, available, not requiring effort to access in the moment they were most needed. Maybe this is a week to tend something that you want to be there when you need it. Not in a fearful way, not in the spirit of, I must do this or I won't be able to cope, but in the spirit of building something real, something practiced, something that becomes more than a theory through the simple act of doing it regularly. A faith practice, if that's part of your life, a community, if that sustains you, a regular returning to what you most value through reading or writing or conversation or the particular quiet that allows your deepest self to surface. These things don't always feel like they're doing much in the ordinary seasons. That's what makes them hard to maintain. They seem like optionals, things you'll get to when you have more time, when things are less busy, when the circumstances are more conducive. But they're not optionals. They are the preparation for the seasons when everything is less ordinary. And those seasons always come. Bing Crosby's voice is still heard all these decades later. But what sustained him, what allowed the voice to keep carrying warmth and ease even through real difficulty, was quieter than anything that was ever recorded. It was the early Mass, the private prayer, the consistent, unannounced, nobody-watching practice of reaching toward what he believed. That was the thing. So take a slow breath, and maybe, this week, do something to tend the quiet practice. Whatever yours is, in whatever form it takes, return to it, or begin it, or simply give it a little more room than you have lately. Not because you need it today, because you will, someday, in some season, and it's better to have it already there.